Watching News at Prime, let's take you back to one of our leading stories where a joint memorial service for the 11 pupils who died in a scholars transport crash in Merafong was held today. The learners, including their driver, tragically lost their lives last week in Carletonville. While the investigation into the accident is ongoing, it has again been it's brought the issue of scholar transport safety to the fore. A non-profit organization that advocates for child safety on the roads is called Wheel Well. They're saying the underfunding, that's one element, is one of the biggest reasons for challenges in scholar transport. We speak now to Peggie Mars, the founder of Wheel Well. Peggie, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time. Thanks indeed for your time. While we are not apportioning blame on the driver, who, by the way, is deceased as well from that accident, that tragic accident last week, we have to be clear that we are bringing up the scholar transport issue on the back of this accident to say what needs to change in order to strengthen this scholar transport system. So, based on your considered view, do you think that the scholar transport system in South Africa is safe for our children?
Not at all, not at all. And first of all, thank you for having me, and my sincerest condolences to those parents of the children. They have my heartfelt sympathy for what they are going through at the moment. We are not doing nearly enough for our children in school transport. And we can start addressing that by setting up a national school transport policy, so that all parties involved have their responsibilities. The drivers are properly vetted and trained. The vehicles are properly roadworthy. And another thing that we call for is the relook at Regulation 23, which is the loading of children in vehicles. Now, when the loading of vehicles and persons, how many persons are allowed on a vehicle, they only consider the mass. So if you look on the license of your vehicle, it will say certified to carry 5 persons, for instance. Now, for the purpose of that, they don't count children as a person. So in this specific transport, there were children between the ages of 11 and 7 years old. Now, 3 of those kids would be counted as 2 persons, and there were 20 of them on that vehicle. We want a child to be counted as a person for the purposes of school transport to start off with, because kids don't have a choice in going to school. You know, we still have a choice of whether we want to go to a mall or something like that. But schools is mandatory. We have to go to school. We have to get an education. And we would like to see that each child is counted as a person for the purposes of loading in school transport, so that every child can sit on a seat that has a dedicated seatbelt and that they can wear that. In this specific case, I don't think a seatbelt would have helped. I don't know if the vehicle was roadworthy. I don't know anything about the driver, and I do not want to cast any blame on him. I think it is a firestorm of conditions that cause a tragic crash like this. But if we could look at school transport of our children in general, we can do something better for them. You know, ever so often we have these stories of our children dying in school transport, and it is devastating, not just to the parents, but to the whole community, to lose their children in such a way. We need to do better.
Peggie, you hold the view as an organization that the regulations surrounding school transport in South Africa are not clear. What other gaps exist in the system apart from the one area that you have just touched on, and this is Regulation 231, which counts 3 children as perhaps 2 persons, if I heard you correctly?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, for kids between 3 and 6, so that would be 2 kids would be counted as a person. So technically that vehicle was probably not overloaded. I think there were 20 kids, and if you do the math, I get to 14, and it's there may be one or, there were too many kids in that vehicle. We shouldn't transport our children like that. In the United States, they have a federal school transport system where children are transported in buses specifically designed to transport children. And the specifics are that those buses have a lower center of gravity. They're very well regulated. There's laws and regulations of how you are about to drive around those vehicles. And these things are very strictly enforced. And I think 0.01% of child road deaths in the state can be ascribed to school transport. Now, I know that it is a first world country, but it is something that we can aspire to. The type of vehicle that we transport our children in should be safe. It should be made to be a people carrier. It should be designed as such. And the drivers, and this is very, very important, they should be properly trained, and they must have a PRDP, and they must be subject to drug tests and stuff like that regularly. They shouldn't have a criminal record or on the sexual offences record. So we need just so much more. And the school transport must be subsidized so that by the state, and I think that the departments of transport and education should have a say in these matters, and so that it becomes affordable to transport our children safely to school.
Yeah. Peggy, the problems in the school transportation system are many. And
Yes.
I say this based sometimes on some of the material you will pick up on social media, where you have videos circulating, where you're able to easily tell that these are children of school-going age in uniform, sitting in either a minibus taxi that they usually get transported in, and they are allowed by the person transporting them to essentially bunk school, and in some instances, they are consuming alcohol. How do you manage such?
You have to have a system in place where there's roles assigned and responsibilities assigned, so that if something like this happens, somebody can be held responsible, and that those people responsible can then face the law in a case like this. There was a case of a crash down in Cape Town, it was about 2-3 years ago, where the children were also just flung from the taxi, and the dad had to go and pick up the pieces of his child's body from the road. And nobody would take responsibility for it, not the education department, not the Department of Transport, not the Metro Police. Nobody said it was their fault. And I know that it is a huge thing to assume responsibility for such an emotive thing as transporting our children. But we need to have rules and regulations in place. I think that children should be transported in proper buses and not minibus taxis. Buses, by the sheer force of their size, are much safer to transport children in. And in a bus, because of the crash dynamics, children don't necessarily need to be wearing a seatbelt or be in a car seat.
Yeah.
And it is just so much.
Sorry, Penny. Sorry, Peggy. Sorry for cutting in.
No problem.
In the particular case we are talking about, the understanding is that this was a private scholar transport. And I'm raising this specifically to raise the question about whether government should actually be the one that is the custodian of this transportation system. You spoke about a national school transport system that needs to be established. So would government be the custodian of such, where anybody who transports children, they are made to answer questions by either the government at national level or at local level, so that their transport systems are properly scrutinized so that children are safe at the end of the day?
Exactly. There are many like lift clubs almost for kids. You know, if you just look around in the morning rush hour, you see the kids being transported at school on the back of buckies, loaded into private vehicles. And it is a problem because there's just nothing that regulates it. Even if it is a private transport, if you transport children, there should be certain regulations that must be adhered to. This is our children that we're talking about.
Yeah, it is a tragic situation indeed. Peggy,
It's very.
I must thank you very much for your time and
No.
the sage advice that you are giving us here tonight. But of course, it does very little to console the parents who are grieving the lives of their children. One family has lost
One.
4 children from that incident. So you
It
can
is
imagine.
devastating. It is absolutely devastating. And we must do our best to prevent this happening into the future. You know, we must learn from these events. I have lost a child myself 30 years ago, and I know how those parents feel.
Yeah.
And I feel for them. And I feel for all the parents who lose children in car crashes. It shouldn't happen. You shouldn't kiss your child goodbye in the morning and then go and identify a body after a crash. It's not how it should be.
Yeah. Peggie Mars, let me thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for your time.